Hello, welcome back. Now, Liverpool have become the top-earning Premier League club for the first time, according to analysis from financial firm Deloitte. And our chief correspondent, Kaveh Solokol, is here to tell us more about that. Good to see you, Kaveh. Liverpool, top British club for the very first time. What is the secret behind their rise up the table?
Well, they had a brilliant season on and off the pitch last year. They won the title. They were in the Champions League as well. And also commercially, they've been doing really, really well. And commercial income for the first time has overtaken broadcast income as to where clubs are making most of their money. And commercially, Liverpool have been doing well. Their commercial revenue up 7% last year. And one of the reasons for that is because since Anfield has been redeveloped, it has become a venue for non-football events. For instance, we've seen Taylor Swift play at Anfield. Dua Lipa, I think, played there as well. And also Bruce Springsteen had some concerts there too. So not only have they been doing really well on the pitch, but they've been doing really well off the pitch as well. And also remember, they didn't play in the Club World Cup in the summer. If they'd played in the Club World Cup in the summer, they probably would have made, I don't know, an extra 80, 90 million pounds from that as well. So they would have been even higher in the list and even closer to the top four clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich and PSG.
Well, look, you mentioned those four clubs and you mentioned the Club World Cup, and I think that may well be part of the answer to my next question, because no English clubs in the top four. You mentioned those four European giants, which are. So what's going on there?
Yeah, it's a bit strange because normally, look, Real Madrid being top, that's not a surprise. I think, Manchester United were last top in 2017. Real Madrid have consistently been top. But it is strange not to have an English club in the top three. And I think the reasons for that now are that commercial revenue has overtaken broadcast revenue. And historically, of course, the Premier League is the richest league because it makes more money from broadcast revenues than any other league. But commercial revenues are even more important now. And you've got clubs like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, PSG. Now, these are gold standard global brands. Yeah. And big companies want to be associated with Real Madrid, Barcelona, PSG and Bayern Munich. Having said that, of course, as you mentioned, 3 out of 4 of them played in the Club World Cup as well. So they would probably have made an extra 70, 80, 90 million pounds from playing in that. And also they're playing in the expanded Champions League. So they're playing more games, making more money from match day revenue, broadcast revenue and commercial revenue as well.
For the first time in the 29 years that Deloitte have been publishing this list, Manchester United are in the lowest position they've been in those 29 years. I remember before the Europa League final last year, people saying this is a huge game for Tottenham because they've gone 17 years without a trophy. It's a huge game for Manchester United because financially they need to be in that Champions League. How worrying for Manchester United that they are as low as they are?
I mean, it is worrying when you see it because I think for the first sort of period when this list was being compiled, it's been going now for 29 years. In those glory years of Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson, when they were winning everything and commercially they were ahead of everyone else, they were consistently top. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom for United, because if you break down these figures, for instance, their match day income, even though they're not doing that well, nobody in the Premier League makes more money from hosting games than Manchester United. Their match day income is still £166 million last year. Commercial revenue, £346 million. Okay, Manchester City have overtaken them. Liverpool are getting very, very close to them as well. Their commercial revenue is kind of flatlining. But where they're really losing out is broadcast revenue. And the reason they're losing out on broadcast revenue, down about £40 million to £180 million, that is £100 million less than Arsenal, £100 million less than Manchester City, £100 million less than Liverpool. Why? Because they're not in the Champions League, and also they weren't in the Club World Cup. I think what Manchester United need to do is just get back into the Champions League. I think when they get back into the Champions League, expanded format of this competition, their revenues will go up by about £100 million. That is why they're so focused under Michael Carrick now of finishing in the top 4 or the top 5, because I think 5th place will get an English side into the
And you mentioned Manchester's match day revenue. There will only be 20 games played at Old Trafford this season.
Exactly. So I think next year they may fall even further in this money list because they're out of the League Cup, they're out of the FA Cup, they're not playing in Europe at all this season. I think they've taken a hit from their deal with Adidas as well. That has gone down because they're not in the Champions League. So I think next year they'll be even lower, but if they get back in the Champions League, I think the good times will be coming back to Manchester United, financially at least.
Off the pitch at least, exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Gavin.
Welcome back to the Transfer Show, and we've got some breaking news for you. James, bring us up to date.
Yeah, Arsenal forward Ethan Nwaneri is in France. He's about to have a medical with Marseille. Arsenal have agreed a loan deal with him until the end of the season. We expect this move to be confirmed in the next 24 hours. Now, this is a straight loan move here. He's seen as a key part of Arsenal's future plans, but this is an opportunity for him to get more game time. He's got a contract at Arsenal up until 2030, so important to note it's a straight loan. He will return to Arsenal in the summer, where surely next season he'll hope to get even more opportunities, but it seems a really good opportunity for him to play for a Champions League club, a club that are flying right now under a world-class manager.
And Roberto De Zerbi. Thank you very much, James. So let's get more on the move. European football expert Andy Brassel joins us. Andy, right on cue as well. Nwaneri, is he going to get plenty of game time at Marseille? How do you see the fit and where might he play? We've seen him be versatile at Arsenal.
Yeah, we have seen him be versatile at Arsenal, but clearly he's going to play in midfield if he's going to play for Marseille. That's where they're a little bit short at the moment. He's not playing on the right side of attack because you've already got someone cutting in on their left foot there, Mason Greenwood, who's having a fantastic season. His place is indisputable. But it's interesting what De Zerbi has talked about throughout the season is what my team is really lacking is a number 10. So this is really interesting because I think we can look at the way that Marseille play and think, okay, we can see Nwaneri going into a sort of inside right position. I think it'll be a little bit higher than that. And seeing as De Zerbi has talked about having this sort of mysterious number 10 that he's going to build his team around, I think that is probably the thing that's got Arteta to intervene and say, you know what, I can see him working with De Zerbi and this will really be to the advantage of Arsenal going forward into the second half of 2026.
Exciting to see how it develops even when he gets into the team. A word on De Zerbi. He didn't really comment yesterday when asked about reports linking him with Manchester United. How would you, as things stand, rate the job he's doing in Marseille?
You know what? Marseille is such a sort of a hotbed of overreaction, really. It's such a passionately followed club that it's really hard to get a handle on it. I mean, from the outside, he's doing a pretty good job. He got them back into the Champions League last season. It's been a little bit more complicated this season, partly because of the rise of Lens, who are top of the table at the moment, which is a remarkable story because they've got a fraction of the budget. And secondly, because they're in the Champions League and they've got this massive pressure, knowing that PSG have had a ridiculous schedule, knowing that they're carrying a load of injuries, and there's a bit of a sense of we have to go and win the league this season, which you should never be feeling in France if you're a team that's not PSG. So look, I would say overall he's doing a pretty good job, but then again you go back to them losing their last home game against Nantes and he's being torn off by every ex-player on television, on French TV, saying, oh, Marseille have not improved under him, which is patently false. So, look, I think he's learnt to be, you know, we think of him as quite an explosive character. He's learnt to be a little bit calmer there because you need to be a little bit calmer to succeed in Marseille because it is always such high tension all of the time. But look, until he gets to that next level, until he wins trophies, do we know that he can take care of a top Premier League club? Although, obviously, Manchester United are trying to be a top Premier League team rather than actually being one at the moment, you could argue.
Do you think, Andy, therefore, you've mentioned the fact that he's calmed down a little bit since being in Marseille, that he would be ready to step in at a club like Manchester United? We've seen the likes of Ruben Amorim and Enzo Maresca be quite vocal when it comes to their thoughts on some of the recruitment policies and some of the things that have been going on above them upstairs. But do you think he'd be ready for that type of challenge? Of course, his focus is on the game this evening, but maybe looking ahead to the summer.
Well, look, James, you know De Zerbi as well as me. He's never going to be the kind of guy who bites his tongue totally. You know, he just can't be that. He can't change what he is. But I think he may have learned to take a step back a little bit, certainly in public, which I think is very important. And if you look at how it unravelled for Ruben Amorim at Manchester United, a huge part of it was his inability to step back from what he really thought and saying that in public. And I feel like De Zerbi has got a little bit better about that. I think if you look at him even in the last 3 months, he's stopped having a dig at referees. He's taken a deep breath when a decision's gone against his team. And I think that sort of thing is really vital and shows the sort of personal growth that we don't always associate with coaches. You know, we expect top coaches to have such a big ego that they have their plan and they stick to it. And they think, this is what's worked for me and I'm never going to change. But I think De Zerbi has understood that if he's really going to reach that next level, he does have to modify his approach a little bit. And, you know, that would definitely be the way to go in at Manchester United, because what brought down Amorim is his inability or unwillingness to change from what he always did.
I'm fascinated to hear that. Now, our top story, Andy, is that Jean-Philippe Mateta has asked to leave Crystal Palace. What we were wondering here is, with Juventus being one of the clubs interested in signing him, but not seemingly prepared to pay what Palace want for him, why aren't they stumping up the money? Is it tactics or is it just finances?
Well, they spent a lot in the summer, Teddy. You know, they brought in a load of forward players. And that to me is why, to an extent, it's slightly surprising that Juventus are going for Jean-Philippe Mateta. But they know, of course, that they're going to be off the hook for Dusan Vlahovic's wages. He's injured at the moment, but he's leaving in the summer. He's out of contract. And unless he takes a massive pay cut, he won't be coming back. You know, other clubs are interested in him, led by Barcelona, who are, of course, always looking for a bargain, particularly when it comes to strikers and particularly when it comes to replacing Robert Lewandowski. But I think the problem is none of those forward players have really clicked so far. Jonathan David's form has been improved over recent weeks. Of course, Palace inquired about him when Juventus originally suggested the Mateta deal. I wonder if one that could come into the picture is Lois Openda, who came across from Leipzig. Of course, technically he's still on loan from Leipzig, so there would be a bit of manoeuvring to get themselves into a position to sign him. But if Palace could get someone of the quality of Openda, that would be a brilliant replacement, really, for Jean-Philippe Mateta, if indeed they have reached the point of no return. Because if it's a question of money, there are other clubs who could offer Palace more. I mean, we know from reports in Turkey that Fenerbahce are very, very interested. They're also interested in Omar Mamouche as well. They're really hell-bent on making a splash in this January transfer window. So Juventus are never going to be able to offer the money up front. Of course, they originally suggested a loan. But I think if we're talking about a possible replacement, then Juventus could really come into play as like a trade partner, I suppose you would say, in the NBA.
Andy, there's been so much interest in Jean-Philippe Mateta. We know Manchester United have a long-standing interest. Juventus clearly want to sign it in this transfer window. Does that tell us something about the quality of Jean-Philippe Mateta? But does it also tell us about the lack of number nines there are across Europe that are thriving right now?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, James. And I think if you look at the position, for example, that we're talking about that Fenerbahce are in, they have got a centre forward at the moment that a lot of people would want. They've got John Duran, you know, and they're paying all of his Saudi wages. So you know that the money's there, and you know that they've got someone of, on paper, a lot of quality. He started 6 Turkish Super League matches this season with injury and scored 3 goals, including a really important one in the Intercontinental Derby against Galatasaray. But that's not enough. If they're going to get one over Galatasaray and get themselves to the top of the league, they need a striker who they can rely on. And as you say, I don't think there are many proper number 9s that are really out there. I mean, as we said recently on the channel, I think the thing with Mateta is he's just got a different profile to so many other strikers. And that, for me, makes him a strong possibility to get into the France national squad for the World Cup this summer. Now, no one in France has believed that it was possible, really, from when he originally got picked to the squad, because they've got so many good forward players. But it's a little bit like Olivier Giroud, if we go back a couple of years. The fact is, there is no one else shaped like Mateta for France. He offers a completely different option. And a lot of clubs out there are looking at him like that as well.
For a big central striker, let's talk about a big centre midfield player. And he reports today that Aston Villa want to sign Ruben Loftus-Cheek from AC Milan, who are, of course, in that Serie A title race. Do you think he'd be a good fit? How has he been playing this season?
He's played well when he's played, but they have been open to dealing him. And when I say dealing and trading, these are the appropriate verbs when we're talking about Serie A teams, because they don't have a bottomless pit of money. In a financial sense and in a prestige sense, I suppose, they're still recovering from Calciopoli, nearly 20 years on. And, you know, this is not the league that it was in the 90s that can go out and spend extraordinary amounts of money on players. So there have been a few offers for Loftus-Cheek throughout the season. He's not always been a first pick, although obviously he's very technically adept and he's physically strong. They believe in him to do a job. They will want a replacement to come in if they get rid of him, but they're definitely open to dealing him. I just don't think, though, that we have the evidence from Ruben Loftus-Cheek. We know his best is very, very good, that he's in the place where he can play every single week for a Premier League team at the moment, although maybe Villa are not requiring him to do that.
Maybe not. We'll see what happens with McGinn and Boubacar Kamara in terms of injuries for Villa. Loftus-Cheek turns 30 this week. Let's talk Chelsea. In for centre-back Jeremy Jacquet from Rennes. What can you tell us about Jeremy Jacquet?
He's a thoroughbred, and it's because he's from the Rennes Academy. You look at some of the other players that have come out of there down the years and more recently. You know, it's a mark of quality coming out of the Rennes Academy, and that's why they can charge such big prices. And of course, they're very, very well backed by the Pinot family, very, very wealthy backing. So they're in a strong position now. I think it was interesting to see Habib Bey nail his colours to the mast, really, for Jacquet earlier this week, where he said, look, if we want to do anything this season, if we want to push towards the top four, synonymous with the Champions League qualifying, of course, Champions League fourth place in France, then we've got to keep him, because you cannot get an equivalent player to replace him. Now, on one hand, he's a very typical Premier League sort of signing, because he's played just over 30 first-team games, so it's all about potential. It's all about you buying a player who you can mould into a superstar for the next 10 years, and that's really where you're getting your value for money. But it will be a lot of money. They've already rejected a €50 million bid. They're looking for something around 80 this January. So it will cost a lot to make it happen. When you see him, he's super convincing. He's elegant, he's poised on the ball, he's big and strong. Really everything that Lenny Yoro was when he was at Lille. So I think there's a bit of a comparison there. And then again, as I said, with the Rennes mark of quality, that's something else as well.
Would there be more wriggle room on their inclination, maybe the money, if there was a loan back to Rennes for the remainder of the season, if that's seen as key?
Maybe, I suppose, but look, they're under no pressure to sell. He's on a long contract. We've seen it before when, I suppose, a comparative thing with Chelsea is when Wesley Fofana wanted to leave St Etienne. You know, he went to the board and said, look, this is a life-changing possibility for me, please let me go. And they held on to the balloon for longer than a lot of people expected, and they got to the cloud in the end, because they ended up getting, I think, 2.5 times what Chelsea initially offered. And you know, maybe that deal's not weathered that well, so obviously Chelsea will hope, or whoever gets him will hope, Jacquet represents better value for money over time. I mean, obviously with Fofana it's been injuries and a lot of stuff out of his control, but there is nothing pushing Rennes to let him go this month. That they say that only an extraordinary offer will make them blink.
We'll see if Chelsea can change their minds. Andy, been brilliant to have you on the Transfer Show. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mikel Arteta's work at Arsenal is being viewed in an even brighter light after the recent coaching shakeups elsewhere. With Chelsea parting ways with Enzo Maresca and Manchester United moving on from Ruben Amorim, the contrast is hard to miss. Arsenal has kept moving forward under Arteta, giving him time through difficult stretches, and now seeing the payoff as the club pushes again in the Premier League title race. It also raises a bigger question about strategy. While Chelsea and United are changing direction again, Arteta has been in place for more than 6 years, outlasting a long list of managers across those two clubs in that span. That stability has become part of the story, and it was a major talking point on the Seeing Red podcast with Tom Canton and John Cross. Beyond reacting to Amorim's dismissal and breaking down wins over Aston Villa and Bournemouth, plus Manchester City's loss to Chelsea, the conversation kept returning to one core idea: structure. Not just who is the coach, but how much power that coach has, and whether the club is built to support a long-term project. Cross pointed to Arsenal as a rare example of patience turning into real strength. He argued that Arsenal's willingness to back Arteta through the messy early phases helped create the stable position they're in now, and that this kind of time and support investment is what can turn a club into something truly solid. Canton's response was sharp and honest. Arteta's arc, he said, has almost become a problem for other clubs, because it tempts them to keep coaches they probably shouldn't. But at the same time, it's still the best example of what can happen when you hire the right person and actually give them time. And that time wasn't smooth. The discussion highlighted how Arsenal could easily have pulled the plug early. 2 8th-place finishes, then 5th, missing out on the Champions League, and a Europa League semi-final exit to Unai Emery's Villarreal. Any of those moments could have pushed a club into panic mode. Instead, the argument is that Arsenal recognized the bigger reality. Arteta didn't have the resources to compete at the required level right away. The squad needed a rebuild. The roster needed to be refreshed. That's where the comparison to Chelsea and United becomes even more pointed. The podcast suggested that recruitment and decision-making structure are often what determine whether a coach survives. If signings don't land, results suffer. And if a coach doesn't have enough influence, or the club isn't aligned behind a clear plan, it becomes much easier for things to collapse. In other words, giving time only works if the coach is empowered to shape the team in a way that matches the vision. Cross also emphasized that Arteta's situation stood out because he pushed to be a true manager, not just a head coach. The idea is simple. Top coaches want a real say in the build, and they want the club to match what they were promised when they took the job. The discussion even pointed to how Arteta survived a low moment, like the home loss to Burnley, because the club stayed behind him. And in that period, with fan pressure affected by the COVID-era environment, Arsenal were able to hold their nerve instead of reacting emotionally. Meanwhile, the big unknowns now shift back to Chelsea and Manchester United. Who replaces Amorim? And how will the next chapter look at Chelsea? The answers may come sooner than people expect. But for Arsenal, the reality stays the same. They're stable, they're moving forward, and they're still in the title chase, while others are starting over again. And that contrast can shape how people judge every manager in the league. Because when two massive clubs hit the reset button again, it forces the same question Cross raised on the show. Is the quick switch actually fixing the problem, or just delaying the real work? The bigger takeaway from the discussion is that time isn't a magic solution by itself. It only becomes valuable when the club's structure supports the plan. And when the coach has the influence to push the squad in the direction he believes it needs to go. That's why the distinction between head coach and manager kept coming up. The podcast point is that if a coach is expected to own the results, he usually wants a meaningful say in the decisions that shape those results. And if he doesn't get that, patience alone won't save him. That's also where Arteta's early struggles get reframed. Those finishes and setbacks could have become a reason to panic. Instead, they became evidence of why alignment matters, because Arsenal chose to treat them as part of a build, not a final verdict. And once the squad was reshaped the way the club believed it needed to be, the results started to reflect that long-term approach. So the repercussions aren't just about Arsenal looking stable, it's about how stability changes your margin for error. When you don't reset every year, you're not constantly starting from zero. You're building on decisions, learning from setbacks, and keeping a clearer identity. For Chelsea and Manchester United, the immediate consequence is obvious. They're changing direction again, which means the next appointment carries even more weight. Because every new coach isn't just judged on results. He's judged on whether the club is finally giving him the structure and authority that the role demands. That's why the question at the end matters so much. Who will replace Amorim? And how will Liam Rosenior do at Chelsea? Because those answers will test the exact theme the show kept returning to. Time, support, structure, and control. And for Arsenal, it's a different kind of pressure. Stability doesn't guarantee trophies, but it does keep you in the fight longer. And right now, while others restart, Arsenal get to stay focused on what they're already doing, chasing the Premier League title.